What happens when you stop chasing? What happens when the texts slow down, when the validation disappears, when your attention is no longer on demand? Most men are terrified to pull back because they think silence equals loss. But what if I told you? Sometimes silence is the moment everything changes. When you ignore her, you don't just create space. You activate psychology she doesn't even consciously understand. And what she does next, it might shock you. Let's talk about it. Silence triggers emotional uncertainty in a way most people underestimate, especially in romantic dynamics where consistency becomes a form of emotional reassurance. When communication has been flowing regularly, messages, calls, reactions, subtle check-ins, it creates a rhythm, and human beings grow attached to rhythm because rhythm feels safe. The brain starts predicting patterns, and prediction creates comfort. So when you suddenly become quiet, when the notifications slow down, when the energy shifts without explanation, her mind does not register it as neutral. It registers it as a disruption, and disruption activates uncertainty. She begins scanning for meaning because silence in connection rarely feels random. It feels intentional. Even if you are simply busy or redirecting your focus, her emotional system interprets the break in pattern as information that needs decoding. She replays the last conversation, analyzes tone, searches for hidden signals she may have missed. What changed? Why did it change? Is this temporary or permanent? The absence of clarity becomes louder than any direct statement you could have made. Emotional uncertainty is powerful because it creates an internal narrative, and that narrative is almost always more intense than reality. When you were consistent, she didn't have to question your interest. Your attention acted as reassurance. But when that attention is withdrawn, even slightly, her sense of emotional positioning shifts. She moves from feeling chosen to wondering if she is still chosen. That subtle insecurity is not about neediness. It is about stability. People attach to emotional stability more than they attach to words. When stability disappears, the mind tries to restore balance. She may check her phone more often, reread old messages, become hyper-aware of your online presence. She may feel an unexpected spike of curiosity about what you are doing, who you are with, why you are distant. Silence creates space, and space invites imagination. Imagination fills gaps with fear, desire, ego, attachment, pride, all at once. The uncertainty does not just make her question you, it makes her question her own value in your world. And the more emotionally invested she is, the louder that uncertainty becomes. Because when someone matters to you, their silence never feels empty. It feels loaded with meaning. Attention withdrawal creates a value shift because attention itself is a form of emotional currency. When you consistently give someone your focus, your time, your curiosity, and your responsiveness, it establishes a certain marketplace dynamic between you. She becomes accustomed to access to your thoughts, your validation, your presence, and over time, what is constantly available begins to feel normal rather than special. Human psychology naturally adapts to abundance. When something is always there, the nervous system stops treating it as rare. It becomes expected. That expectation subtly lowers perceived value, not because you lack worth, but because predictability reduces intensity. So when you suddenly pull back your attention, when your replies are no longer immediate, when your energy is redirected toward your own priorities, the dynamic recalibrates. What was once assumed now feels uncertain. What was once guaranteed now feels conditional. And in that shift, value begins to rise. The absence of your attention forces comparison. She unconsciously measures how it felt when you were fully engaged versus how it feels now that you are not. The contrast creates emotional awareness. She notices the gap. She notices the difference in her day without your consistent input. And that awareness is powerful because value is often realized through loss, not possession. When attention is withdrawn, it introduces scarcity. Scarcity activates focus. The human mind prioritizes what feels less accessible. It becomes more attentive to the very thing that is no longer easily obtained. This is not manipulation. It is behavioral economics playing out in emotional form. When supply decreases, perceived demand increases. Your reduced availability subtly communicates that your time is not endlessly negotiable, that your energy is not on standby. And when someone senses that they no longer have automatic access to you, they begin reassessing your position in their emotional hierarchy. This reassessment can trigger deeper investment. She may lean in more, initiate more, attempt to regain proximity. Because when attention is no longer freely flowing, it regains weight. Every response from you feels more significant. Every interaction feels intentional rather than routine. The shift is not about playing games. It is about the psychological reality that people value what requires effort and what carries the possibility of absence. When your attention becomes selective rather than constant, it signals self-respect, priorities, and independence. And independence alters attraction because it reframes you from being a source of guaranteed validation to being a presence that must be chosen and maintained, creating a subtle but undeniable elevation in how you are perceived and how much emotional importance you hold. She tests you subtly because direct confrontation risks emotional exposure, and most people protect their vulnerability before they protect their curiosity. When your behavior changes, especially when your attention decreases, she does not immediately ask what is happening. Instead, she gathers information indirectly. Her mind wants clarity, but her pride wants safety. So she creates situations that reveal your level of interest without requiring her to openly request reassurance. These tests are rarely conscious strategies. They are emotional instincts designed to restore certainty. She might send a casual message that carries no real importance just to see how quickly you respond. She may reference something you both discussed earlier to observe whether you remember details. She could make a light joke, a playful tease, or even a mild challenge to gauge your engagement level. Each small interaction becomes data. She is not only listening to what you say, but measuring the effort behind it. Effort communicates priority, and priority communicates emotional position. Sometimes the tests become even quieter. She changes her behavior to watch yours. Maybe she replies slower than usual, mirroring the distance you created, waiting to see if you notice. Maybe she becomes slightly colder to see if you move closer. She may post something intentionally noticeable, not necessarily to impress others, but to see whether you react. Not reacting is information. Reacting is information. Everything becomes feedback. She is reading consistency, tone, emotional investment, and patience. If you become anxious and overcompensate, she learns your attention is easily destabilized. If you become irritated and confrontational, she learns your interest is conditional on control. If you remain steady, calm, and unchanged in your demeanor, she feels grounded because emotional stability suggests authenticity rather than performance. The purpose of the test is not to manipulate you, but to understand the emotional safety of staying connected to you. These subtle tests intensify when she senses mixed signals. Humans struggle more with ambiguity than with rejection. Clear disinterest allows closure, but uncertain interest creates attachment. So she looks for patterns. Are you warm one day and distant the next? Do you initiate only when convenient? Do you maintain the same tone regardless of her behavior? Her attraction is influenced less by what you promise and more by how predictably you exist. Each small reaction from you either strengthens her comfort or amplifies her doubt. Through these quiet observations, she determines whether your distance reflects independence, fading interest, emotional immaturity, or quiet confidence, continuously adjusting her own emotional investment based on the stability she perceives in your behavior and the meaning she assigns to your consistency. Her ego and her attachment begin to clash the moment she feels your attention shifting, because those two forces inside her want opposite outcomes. Attachment wants closeness, reassurance, restoration of the emotional rhythm that once felt stable. Ego wants dignity, control, and the preservation of self-image. When you pull back, attachment whispers that she should reach out, that she should re-establish connection, that losing emotional access to you feels uncomfortable and unresolved. But ego intervenes immediately, reminding her that she should not appear too eager, that she should not risk looking replaceable, that chasing someone who is stepping away could bruise her pride. This internal conflict creates emotional tension that is far more intense than anything happening externally. She is not just reacting to you, she is negotiating with herself. One part of her wants to lean in and close the distance. Another part wants to lean back and protect her power. The stronger her feelings were before the shift, the louder this clash becomes. Attachment grows in familiarity and shared emotional investment. Ego grows in self-respect and perceived status within the dynamic. When your silence introduces uncertainty, attachment feels threatened because it senses potential loss. Ego feels threatened because it senses potential rejection, and rejection challenges identity. No one enjoys feeling unwanted, especially after believing they were valued. So instead of immediately expressing vulnerability, she may mask it with composure. She may act indifferent. She may slow down her responses. She may appear unaffected. But indifference can be a shield rather than a truth. Her ego tells her that maintaining distance preserves leverage. Her attachment tells her that distance risks losing you entirely. The push and pull inside her becomes exhausting, which is why her behavior may seem inconsistent. One day she might move closer, warmer, more attentive. The next day she might withdraw, guarded, almost cold. It is not confusion about you alone. It is confusion about which internal voice to obey. If she prioritizes attachment, she risks feeling exposed. If she prioritizes ego, she risks emotional regret. That tension forces her to evaluate how much you truly matter. If her attachment outweighs her pride, she will soften and attempt reconnection. If her pride outweighs her attachment, she will detach to restore her sense of control. In that clash, her true level of investment is revealed, because when ego and attachment collide, the side that wins determines whether she fights for the connection or protects her self-image at the cost of losing it. She either leans in or detaches, because emotional uncertainty cannot exist forever without forcing a decision. When your behavior shifts and your attention is no longer predictable, she reaches a psychological crossroads. At first, there is analysis, subtle testing, the internal clash between ego and attachment, but eventually the tension demands resolution. The human mind craves clarity, even if that clarity leads to loss. If her feelings are strong, if the connection held depth and meaning for her, your distance will not push her away immediately. Instead, it will activate pursuit in a more refined way. She may initiate more often, ask more intentional questions, show greater warmth, or create opportunities to re-establish closeness. Leaning in does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it is simply increased effort, more emotional availability, more visible investment. She chooses to move toward the uncertainty rather than away from it, because losing you feels heavier than risking vulnerability. Leaning in requires courage, because it means prioritizing attachment over pride. It means accepting the possibility that she could care more than you do. But when attraction and emotional investment are genuine, the fear of losing connection outweighs the fear of appearing eager. She becomes more present, she pays closer attention, she may even subtly compete for your focus if she senses it drifting elsewhere. Her energy becomes intentional because she has decided that the connection is worth preserving. This shift often surprises men who assumed distance would automatically cause withdrawal. Sometimes distance clarifies desire. Sometimes it intensifies it. When she leans in, it is not because she lacks options. It is because she has evaluated her emotional priorities and chosen you within them. But if her investment was shallow, if her interest relied mostly on convenience, validation, or entertainment, then your withdrawal produces a different outcome. Instead of leaning forward, she leans back. Instead of increasing effort, she reduces it. She mirrors your distance not as a strategy, but as acceptance. Detachment becomes self-protection. If she senses that maintaining connection requires chasing stability that is no longer offered, she may decide that preserving her emotional balance matters more than preserving the bond. Her replies grow shorter, her curiosity fades, her presence becomes minimal, not because she never cared, but because she recalibrated her expectations. In detaching, she restores control and avoids prolonged uncertainty. The decision reveals depth. When pressure is introduced, surface-level interest dissolves while genuine attachment intensifies, forcing her to either step closer with intention or step away with finality. The psychology of scarcity operates on a principle so deeply wired into human behavior that most people respond to it without realizing they are responding at all. When something feels abundant and constantly accessible, the brain relaxes around it. It stops assigning urgency. It stops assigning heightened value. Accessibility creates comfort, but it can also create complacency. In romantic dynamics, constant availability can unintentionally reduce perceived significance because the mind begins to assume permanence. But the moment availability decreases, perception shifts. Scarcity introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty sharpens focus. When your time, energy, or attention are no longer endlessly accessible, they begin to feel limited. And limited resources automatically command more psychological weight. This is not about manipulation. It is about how humans prioritize what feels rare. The brain is designed to notice potential loss more intensely than stable possession. So when access to you is reduced, her awareness of you often increases. Scarcity heightens emotional contrast. When she was used to frequent communication, consistent reassurance, and predictable engagement, your presence blended into her routine. But when that pattern changes, the absence creates a gap. That gap becomes noticeable. She feels the difference between what was and what is, and contrast amplifies perception. The less she hears from you, the more she may think about you. The less predictable your responses become, the more significance each interaction holds. A single message carries more weight when it is not guaranteed. A brief moment of attention feels more intentional when it is not constant. Scarcity does not create feelings from nothing. It intensifies what already exists. If attraction was present, it becomes sharper. If curiosity was mild, it becomes focused. Because when something appears less attainable, the mind assigns it higher status. Scarcity also signals independence. When you are not constantly seeking validation or proximity, it communicates that your life is full beyond the connection. Fullness is attractive because it suggests choice rather than need. When attention feels selective rather than automatic, it implies standards, and standards elevate perceived value. She begins to sense that access to you is something to maintain rather than something guaranteed. That subtle shift changes emotional positioning. Instead of feeling secure in endless availability, she feels motivated to protect her place in your world. The possibility of losing access creates emotional urgency, not panic, but awareness. Awareness that what feels limited must be appreciated differently. Scarcity reframes your presence from routine to meaningful, from expected to intentional, from background consistency to foreground significance, increasing emotional intensity simply because what is less accessible often feels more important. In the end, this was never about playing games, creating artificial distance, or manipulating emotions. It was about understanding what truly happens beneath the surface when attention shifts. Silence triggers uncertainty because it disrupts emotional rhythm. Attention withdrawal creates a value shift because availability shapes perception. She tests you subtly because she seeks clarity without sacrificing pride. Her ego and attachment clash because vulnerability and self-protection cannot comfortably exist at the same time. She either leans in or detaches because uncertainty eventually demands a decision. And the psychology of scarcity intensifies everything because what feels limited often feels meaningful. The deeper lesson is not that you should ignore her to provoke a reaction. The deeper lesson is that your presence must come from strength, not fear. When your attention is given freely but not desperately, when your silence is calm rather than calculated, when your focus on your own life is genuine rather than strategic, the dynamic naturally shifts. People respond differently to someone who is centered. They feel the difference between absence rooted in insecurity and distance rooted in self-respect. If she values you, your silence will not destroy the connection. It will clarify it. If she was only attached to convenience, your distance will reveal that too. Either way, you gain insight. Because when you stop overextending, over-explaining, and over-pursuing, you allow truth to surface without force. Attraction is not built on constant reassurance. It is built on emotional stability, self-possession, and quiet confidence. When you understand the